Hello guys, and welcome to this first slideshow on the landscape genre. You can see there the title of the broader PowerPoint slideshow, and the broader idea will be the relevance of the Western landscape subgenres for modern and postmodern landscape art. To say just some few general things about the landscape genre, which you can also read there in the PowerPoint notes. The idea of landscape is a historical, social, and cultural construction. So in other words, if you are walking somewhere in the veld, or you are walking in a forest or somewhere, when you are outside in nature, the idea that this nature can be seen as a landscape changes historically and socially. Nowadays, we don't worry so much, for example, about forests. We just want trees to be cut down for paper, and then we build there, we develop housing and so on. So the way that we think about nature changes. I'm thinking pretty soon we will realize the planet is in a dire situation, and we will start thinking differently about the ideas of nature and landscape. Landscape, of course, and nature, we exploit it, like we said, we use it to our own advantages. Okay, so there to move on, speaks there about the subgenres. I'll get to those again in a moment, but they are the picturesque, pastoral, and sublime. Those are the three subgenres within the landscape genre as an umbrella term, and we will look at these three separately. And this particular slideshow, though, is on the so-called prehistory of the landscape genre. There are ways and means of approaching landscape representations. They can be anthropomorphic. I always think about, there's an example of a painting by Salvador Dali where it's a landscape if you look at it, but then if you just stare at it for a little bit longer, you realize it's actually the face of a woman. So the landscape has bodies can also be represented as landscapes. We get political landscapes, for example. In this very slideshow, or this very video, we will look at some examples of battles that had happened. There's also a correspondence between landscape and technology. Sometimes some sort of a man-made technology encroaches on a landscape, for example, trains that move through a landscape, or if somebody builds factories, for example, any such human artificial interactions in the landscape can also be represented. Some landscapes can be biological. In a later video, we will look at examples by Hans Harker where he actually grows plants inside the gallery. So those are germination processes that he brings into the gallery. You can also have geological landscapes or rock formations. We will actually see examples of those as well. You get archaeological excavations. Some landscapes can be mystical. We will see some examples of those. We have religious landscapes. Landscapes can be allegorical. So clearly there's quite a variety of approaches to the landscape genre. There you can see the subgenres, the picturesque, pastoral, and sublime. These are the three subgenres. And to keep in the back of your mind as we go through these slideshows, what is important to realize is that we are also investigating the relationship between humans, us, and nature. And that relationship between us and nature finds different expressions depending on which subgenre we are discussing. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Okay, so as I've mentioned, for this slideshow, we will look at the prehistory and antecedents of the landscape genre. All right, some landscapes can be mythical. Here we see the in Peru, their holy city, Machu Picchu, it's called. Such so-called mythical landscapes have what they call a numinous feeling to it. Numinous means that we feel it has some religious or spiritual quality. When we are there, we feel as though we are in the presence of something divine. It has that sort of a feeling to it. And you can imagine if you're there today, Machu Picchu is actually open for tourists to visit it. But I think you can imagine if you're there, it's in the Andes, in the rocks, not the rock, in the mountains. It's very high up. You can see you're amongst the clouds. There are these mountain peaks. You have to walk all the way there, and there's these ruins. It has this sort of a mystical, numinous quality, where if you go there, you will have some sort of maybe a realization or an epiphany. These are the places where the Incas made their sacrificial offerings as well. So it has this sort of a feel to it. A mythical landscape. This is also Machu Picchu. Different slideshow there. You can go and look at the original landscape PowerPoint that Prof. Iman made. There are quite a number actually of images of Machu Picchu. This one, then the watchtower from the Temple of the Sun, if you are curious. These are very cool. Also in Peru, the so-called Nazca lines. These drawings that some civilization made. You can see there some 200 years before Christ, and they are very big. You can see they stretch there over 200 to 600 meters. So this distance here is massive, that you can see them from space. This particular one, as you can see the name there, called the hummingbird. There are loads. This one is the monkey, for example. This one, of course, is the hummingbird that we see here. And there you can see all the different sites where they appear in Peru. And they're strange, right? We don't know exactly who made them. And when you're there, they also have this sort of a mystical quality. An example from South Africa, a drawing here by Laduma Madela, South African artist from Natal. He made quite a number of these drawings, and I think you might already be familiar with them of the creation myths of the Zulu people. This one is Meflin, excuse my pronunciation, the sky god from the Zulu belief, and here he is in his home that Laduma Madela has drawn. Clearly a mythical place. There are, by the way, in the original PowerPoint, more images from Laduma Madela. If you are interested, go and have a look at them. And if you have questions, as always, please do not be shy to give me a buzz and ask. Another element to these mythical landscapes is the notion of the so-called eternal order versus the cyclical order of nature. To interrupt myself, these are these drawings, paintings, or actually I think they're manuscript pages, are from a book called The Very Rich Hours. That's what that says, The Very Rich Hours. It chronicles the passing of time, right? And as you can see, the one on the left is February. It's winter in the northern landscape, northern hemisphere at least, in February. And here in October, that's autumn. That's when they're now harvesting. So if we talk about the cycles of nature, as the months pass, we go from February to October, from winter go through some spring, summer, back to autumn, and in these different times, different actions are done depending upon what time, and these they change with the tides, with the months, with the seasons. They change, but they're also in a cycle. Next year it will be the same. In comparison, the starry heaven is fixed. The constellations are fixed in the sky. They do not change. They have this eternal order. So in a landscape, in this, we see both the eternal and the cyclical change of nature. And that there is an order and a structure to it. Okay, landscapes can also be allegorical. Go and look at this video, go watch this video, and also in the original PowerPoint there are some slides that include images from this landscapes, I should say. This is a in Siena, the Italian town of Siena, in their city hall, effectively. There are these murals, and the murals are allegories for, as you can see, good and bad governance. So it's quite self-explanatory. If you go and watch the video, everything should be quite clear. Please do that. Okay, so if we're now talking about the early prehistory, the development of and the so-called antecedents to landscape, there is this a continuum. On the one hand, we have maps, and then on the other hand, we have landscapes, and then everything that happens sort of in between. We can have in one painting, one image, a landscape that develops into a map, and on the other hand, we can also have a map that can be schematized to appear as though it were a landscape. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, as you can see there written in the notes in the PowerPoint, at what point does a landscape offer the same sort of an information value or knowledge value as we find in a map, and on the vice versa, at what stage is it possible for a map to give us as the same pleasure that we find in a painting? And as seen here, there was a stage in the sort of 15th, 16th centuries, maybe even going into the 17th century, that's my phone again, where the work of the cartographer and the landscape artists were sort of, they meshed a little bit. To be one would be to be the other, as we see in this example by Leonardo, a bird's eye view of Tuscany. So yeah, Leonardo is both the artist and the cartographer, and we see this bird's eye view, this view from the top, looking down at this landscape, and it's the idea of the artist's lordly vision, right? The artist sees himself as the one who is in charge, as the one who dominates over the landscape. Everything that you can see as far as the eye stretches, you can do with as you will. That's sort of the notion. This, by the way, it's halfway between a bird's eye view and a relief map. Even you can see a little bit, there's a strange play with the angle as we move towards the dam. On the one side, it's more of a flat angle, and then at the top, it's tilted a little bit in our direction to give it this sort of a relief map type feel. This, by the way, is, if I understand it correctly, true this is what the physical geography of the landscape actually looks like. So an interesting sort of a meeting of landscape and map. Look at this example. In the Netherlands, in particular, the work of the cartographer and the artist were symbiotic. They work together in the notion of topography. Topos is a place, and graphein, as you might remember from the Greek, to write. So topographies are representations of places, basically. So here, as you can see, the bottom half over here, we see a painting of the siege, so-called, but then as it stretches in that direction, it becomes more and more and more map-like. So it's described, it's called, this particular representation, a diagrammatic, a cartographic illustration of this siege. Very cool example. I really like this one. The next one here, we've now left the bird's eye view and we see more of this sort of a topographical view of the landscape from closer to ground height. This is another one of my absolute favorites. Painting by Jacob van Ruysdael. See there, called The View of Haarlem. That, of course, is the Haarlem in the Netherlands. Now, this town, in this period, the 17th century, was famous internationally for its linen bleaching industry. And you can see here in the semi-foreground, the linen here being bleached. It's a panoramic view of the town. Remember now in the 1670s was relatively small, still wasn't the huge cities we have today. But we see the map of the landscape and then the city on the far horizon, the profile of the city, the cathedral there, really the one thing that draws our attention. Interesting in this painting is the land versus the skyscape, or I'm going to call it the cloudscape. So there's this sort of an interaction between land and sky, and the sky clearly dominates in this particular painting. And then there's these wonderful contrasts that we see. On the one hand, we have these very geometrical shapes, the cathedral, and the linen in their sort of geometric squares, versus these round and plump and organic, almost soft toned cloud clusters. All these different shapes, geometric and round and soft, gives this painting a wonderful dynamism. Okay, so that's the prehistory, guys. The next slideshow you can go and have a look at is the one on the picturesque tradition of the landscape genre.